This is a knitted cast on. So what you'll need for this cast on is your yarn and your needles. So if you're working with a circular needle, we're going to use both tips of the needle. And if you're working with straight needles, you will need two needles. We're going to begin with a slip knot. And I always like to work with a tail adjusted slip knot. That means that later on, if my slip knot loosens up, I can pull on the tail to tighten it up. So to make a tail adjusted slip knot, I wrap the tail over my finger. So you can see my tail is pointing up, and then I tuck the tail into the loop on my finger and pull my slip knot through. And then you'll see that if you pull on the tail, you can adjust the size of the slip knot. Lucy Neatby calls this a tail adjusted slip knot, and I think she's brilliant. Later on, if that slip knot gets too loose, you just pull on the tail to tighten it up. Now we're going to do a cable cast on. So the cable cast on begins in the same manner that most knitted cast ons do. You're going to insert your knitting needle into the slip knot. So you're going to insert your right hand needle into the slip knot, wrap the yarn around the right hand needle tip and pull it through the slip knot, making that loop nice and big. Don't take this stitch on your left hand, leave all the stitches on your left hand. So the loop that's now on your right hand needle, we're going to put onto the left hand needle, and we're going to insert a little twist while we do that. So I take the left hand needle tip and I go under and into the loop on my right hand needle, slide my right hand needle out, and just snug it up slightly. I don't snug it up too tight yet. Now what we're going to do is insert your right hand needle tip in between those two stitches. And once you've got your right hand needle tip in between the two stitches, now you can snug up your stitch that's on the stitch that you just made. You're going to yarn over on that right hand needle and pull that yarn over to the front of your work. So in between the two stitches. And you can see I'm making my loop nice and large. Now you take your left hand needle tip and go under and into that loop that's on your right hand needle. Drop your right hand needle out, slip it in between those two stitches, and give your yarn a good tug. So your right hand needle is providing a spacer between the two stitches, and now you also have it in position so that you can wrap the yarn around it again, pull that loop through to the front, left hand needle goes under the loop and inside, then drop your right hand needle, stick it in between the two stitches and snug it up. I'm going to do that continental style now, just in case any of you are continental knitters. So I've inserted my wool needle between the two stitches. I'm picking the yarn from the back, and sometimes I'll give it a little bit of extra tension by putting my right hand finger on there in order to pull it through to the front. Oh, I split my stitch. Again, make it very big. Well, relatively big for a loop, and then take your left hand needle and tuck it underneath and into the loop. So everything's exactly the same, except that if you're a continental knitter, you're going to pick the yarn rather than yarning over with it. You're going to cast on the number of stitches that your pattern calls for. So in my case, that's 42. Reason why I like to slip my wool needle in between the stitches now and tighten it up is because one of the downsides, if you will, of a knitted cast on is that if you don't do that, can you see how the yarn is kind of crossed over on my needle tip here? When I go to snug it up, the last stitch that I made is always forming a bit of an X over top of the previous stitch that I made. And so if you don't slip your needle in between when it's loose, you kind of have to push that last stitch out of the way to get your needle tip in there. So I would like to show you another trick that I learned from Ann Budd. So cast on all but the last stitch. In other words, cast on, save your last stitch for my little demo here, and I'll show you what to do to the last stitch to make sure that it doesn't cross over like that. All right, so I'm working on the second size. I've cast on 45 stitches and I'm now about to cast on my last stitch. So here's the last little cast on tip for you. When doing a knitted cast on, when you make your last stitch, before you park it on the needle, bring your working yarn in between the needles, kind of like you were going to purl, and then put your last stitch on the needle. I'm not going to put my needle in between because this is the last stitch. But notice now that when I pull my yarn forward to snug it up, the yarn is helping to keep that last stitch from crossing over the previous one. And that's just clever, in my opinion. So that's another little tip that you might like for any kind of knitted cast on.